the legs. A part of the body most of you likely aren't too fond of training. However, a small minority of you might find it to be your favorite part of the body to train. And to be honest, the reason why leg training is always memed on and more often than not skipped kind of makes sense. Over all my years of training and coaching, I've come to notice that almost everyone trains legs wrong. So, in this video, I'm going to show you how to train your legs right and in a way that might actually make you enjoy leg days in the same way I do. So first, let's briefly discuss some quadriceps anatomy in order to best figure out how to train them. And then we'll get into some of the best exercises to build beefy quads for that glorious X-frame we're all looking for. Now, as you can see here, the quadriceps are composed of 4 muscles. Starting most medially, we have the vastus medialis, which is commonly referred to as your teardrop, followed by the vastus intermedius, and then most laterally is, of course, your vastus lateralis, which is, of course, what's most important in developing the aforementioned X-frame appearance for bodybuilding. Now, these 3 muscles all originate on the upper femur and insert onto the tibia via the patellar tendon, meaning that all 3 of these muscles are monoarticular and, therefore, cross only one joint to mainly perform only one movement, which is knee extension. So, thankfully, training these muscles will be easy. However, the 4th muscle, known as the rectus femoris, sits on top of the vastus intermedius and originates at the hip, meaning it crosses 2 joints and is therefore biarticular, making it mainly responsible for 2 actions, hip flexion as well as knee extension. Meaning that, of course, if we want to develop our rectus femoris, we will likely want to use exercises that target both hip flexion as well as knee extension at the same time, and or use a combination of exercises that target both actions in isolation, which gives us a pretty good idea of what kind of exercises we'll be looking for to build the perfect quadriceps growth program. But if we're looking to optimize the quadriceps growth and actually enjoy training, we're likely going to want to slim down our exercise selection even more by adding a few more caveats that will likely result in a more stimulative and enjoyable exercise selection. So, now that we're past anatomy, let's dive a bit deeper into what other characteristics might provide the ultimate exercise selection. Starting with what particular characteristics typically make an exercise good or best or better than others. So first, we're going to look at what muscle length the exercise trains your muscle through, with muscle lengths referring to what state the muscle is in when tension is applied. For example, this would be a muscle being trained at a shortened muscle length, given that there is currently tension on the muscle while it's in its shortest, most contracted position. And this being an example of a long muscle length, given that the muscle is currently under tension while it's in its most lengthened or stretched position. And when considering muscle lengths, generally the research shows that training muscles through both lengths is likely the most optimal way to train, with a slight recent bias on more lengthened positions possibly resulting in superior hypertrophy outcomes than having a greater bias towards a shortened position. FYI, for more information on muscle lengths and range of motion, I have a video covering the topic more in depth. If you haven't already seen it, you could click here or wait till the end of the video to see it in the cards. This means that we will likely want to select exercises primarily based on their ability to apply tension in the lengthened position, but still have a few exercises, if not all, that also target the shortened position. Next, we'll want to take each exercise stimulus to fatigue ratio into consideration, given that I find the biggest issue that people have against leg days is how much fatigue and muscle damage they accumulate during their session. And given that compound lifts like the squat and deadlift are generally quite fatiguing and in comparison to isolation moves don't provide a lot of isolative stimulus to a specific muscle group like leg extensions would to the quads, for example, I typically only recommend 1 to 2 fatiguing compound lifts per session with most clients. However, some clients will of course do best on a 0 to 1, along with other clients obviously being able to and preferring 2 or more. But again, most people will generally, in my experience, perform best and enjoy leg days most within that 1 to 2 compound range. And lastly, we generally want to select exercises that are easily progressible, either by reps, weight, or both. And since most exercises fit this criteria, it's not worth a lengthy mention, but it is still important to keep in mind. So with all these factors in mind, we can now begin to design a leg day that best achieves our strength and hypertrophy goals for the quads. Of course, everyone being different, everyone watching this video will likely have different programs in mind to best achieve their individual best gains in whatever domain they're training for. However, for the viewer's sake, I figured I'd make an example of a leg day that encompasses all of these criteria and might theoretically be best for the average person looking to build a massive set of legs, aka someone who is looking to hypertrophy their legs. So for our first exercise, we're going to start with a compound that works the quads through both the lengthened and shortened position, has a relatively good stimulus to fatigue ratio, and is easily progressible, the Bulgarian split squat. Now, this exercise will, of course, not be for everyone, but for most people, it does provide a great stimulus, and with enough rest in between each leg, the fatigue isn't too difficult a burden. Not only that, it lengthens the quads under tension at the knee for your working leg when you're in the hole, as well as lengthens your non-working leg between sets at the knee and at the hip when in the hole. However, if you find that this exercise is a bit difficult or too fatiguing, you can, of course, sub this exercise out for something less fatiguing and still lengthens your quads at the knee, like a deep leg press or hack squat, for example. Now, as a personal preference on leg days, I enjoy working my entire lower body in an antagonist-protagonist fashion, so I typically follow a quad exercise with a hamstring exercise like a Romanian deadlift, for example, with, of course, my future hamstring video having a more in-depth explanation behind the choices of my hamstrings exercises. Then, for our third exercise, I'd go back to the quads, and since we've already done our compound lifts for the session, we're going to be focusing on a more isolative exercise to maximize the stimulus and reduce fatigue, which is why I typically perform a sissy leg extension hybrid, where you flex your glutes and hinge your hips forward when you're in the stretch position to stretch both your proximal and distal quad areas to hit all 4 heads of the quads. Then, when contracting, you can unflex your glutes and sit back down in the chair while you extend your legs to again contract both at the hips and at the knees, therefore hitting all 4 muscles of the quads through their theoretical full range of direct function. This exercise is one of my favorite quad exercises and is what I attribute a lot, if not almost all, of my rectus femoris gains to. Then, once again, for our fourth exercise, I'd go back to a hamstring exercise, perhaps something like a leg curl, and then I'd follow those sets with whatever accessory muscles you'd want to target on your lower body days as well, like the calves or glutes, for example, which I will, of course, go into greater detail about in my future glute and calf training videos. Now, before the video ends, I'd like to briefly cover the volume of working sets I've included per muscle group, since, of course, volume is a huge debate online in regards to hypertrophy outcomes. In this video, both exercises I've selected were to be performed at a 3 set per exercise, which is, of course, only 6 total working sets per training day, and only 12 total sets per week, assuming you perform 2 leg days a week. Now, for some of you, your opinion might range from this being too little all the way up to too much volume. However, on average, the data suggests that this is actually a very reasonable volume to expect most, if not all, of your hypertrophy gains for the average person. Again, however, this does not mean that 12 sets is what you would achieve your best results on. Of course, each person's volume is very individual, and the best way you can figure out which volume works best for you is by experimenting over time. And one of my favorite ways of selecting volume is auto-regulating based on how you feel. Over time, you will come to understand which volumes work best for you and keep your joints not achy while still achieving best results. For example, I know over years of testing that doing 10 or less sets for me doesn't really provide much of a stimulus for me no matter how hard I train, and I feel immediately recovered and ready to train my quads again the next day on that volume. However, 18 or more sets would begin to make my joints ache achy and will be hard to fully recover leg day to leg day, week to week. Therefore, I typically train in the 12 to 16 sets per week range, and I see great results and feel strong and ready to train every single time I'm on my next leg day. So with all that information in mind, I hope this video helps you guys achieve some of the best quad growth you have ever experienced and brings you into some of the next steps of your fitness journey. If you liked the video or found the information in this video useful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I wish you all the best, and I'll be seeing you guys next time. Peace.